Okay, so my patient presented with deeper 5 millimeter pockets with plenty of subgingival calculus and supragingival calculus um, in all areas of the mouth. However, there was the 5 millimeter pockets mostly on teeth 3, 4, and 5. And in the perio re-eval, there was also a frication involvement on number 3. But to start with, I would be typically using my 15, 16, 17, 18. So right now I have my 15, 16, and I would utilize this because of all the subgingival calculus, um, which to note, obviously it would go through with the ultrasonic at first, but then for instrumentation afterwards. Um, I did indicate that in certain areas there would be SRP involved because of the tenacious calculus that has obviously been there for quite a long time, and just the need for some reattachment. So I did recommend that. But to start in the deeper pockets in the back, the posterior, I'm going to be using quad 1 for most of this. Um, because that's what I chose. That's where most of the deeper pocketing is. Anyway, so this is my 15-16, and the way that I more easily adapt it is mesially, and then I always turn up, and the elbow points towards the back of the mouth, so I know that this is for quad 1. And obviously I'm not in any particular clock position at the moment, but that's just for all intensive purposes. um, so the patient does not have tooth 2, it is just 1 and then 3, I do believe. Yes. And so just to start with 3 for demonstration purposes, since this is a mesial instrument, I will be moving this direction. And just to insert, they want to insert a little bit before mesial, closed, and then open, and use shorter strokes along the apex, and just really getting in there to get out the calculus, then move to the next tooth. Now I would use more oblique strokes just because of the angle, but then to go back through as well, to get deeper down, you can also use this instrument more horizontally, just to make sure that at the bottom of the pocket we are getting all the calculus. And then, like I said, I'm not as good with vertical strokes on these teeth back here because it's harder for me with the angulation of the instrument. So I would just use a lot of oblique strokes and the horizontal down along the pocket, and shorter strokes as well. And then continue through from the posterior. Now this is obviously a posterior instrument. So I got some stuff off. And then I would switch clock positions, and just to check again, my instrument to go up, this faces towards the back. So again, this is a little bit awkward. So they don't have tooth 2, so let's do 3 again. And insert closed, open up, and shorter strokes. These are working strokes, obviously lighter for assessment, but I'm doing working right at the moment. Just keeping the angulation and getting the calculus off. And I'm getting caught there. I'm applying a little bit more pressure again with oblique strokes, and then I'd go back through and do just a little bit more of a horizontal sweep. So that is the 15-16. Now the 17-18. my trick always that I learned from Kiera actually is to go mesially, turn, and then the elbow again points towards the back, so I know I have the correct working end. Now I struggle with this a lot just because I know it's harder for me to do the closed insertion and then to open it back up when especially I'm not going very far with it and it's really short strokes. You're already almost around the distal. So that is what I generally have issues with. I am not good with the insertion of this. I'm not sure whether or not you can see that, hopefully, because I have Wyatt recording for me. But you just follow that up distally. Again, this is a little awkward right here because I'm going close and open that back up there. I'm getting stuck down there on the calculus. So that's the 17, 18. Let me see here too. I'd have the patient turn towards me. So that I have the correct working end. Now, and I'm inserting. Can you see it this way? Sorry. A little bit before the distal, and then short oblique strokes. Again, continuing toward the contact, but not coming all the way up so you don't get stuck. Sorry, that's number 2, and they don't have number 2. Now, I could use either one of these instruments on the furcation, but just I like how the universal, the Barnhart basically, is a little bit more long. So, and also you can go either direction with that, obviously. So once again, when I get it adapted properly, I would use that to probably go in mesially first and just find the furcation and turn in and just kind of pull. I do a little bit of an assessment stroke first to make sure that there is definitely still calculus in there, and if there is, I would just use several different strokes to get into that furcation, just making sure to get both sides of the root surface, so then that way we're not missing anything, and just remembering the anatomy. Same thing on the other side, which obviously getting the one side of the furcation and turning a little bit just to get like underneath, and then turning and getting the other side in there too, and just paying attention to the gingiva so that you don't cause any damage or anything. My next instrument as well, for the second part, so part B, the pocketing there wasn't any bleeding and it seemed to respond, so the gingiva seemed to become a little bit more healthier. However, there was still 5mm pockets left in some areas with no bleeding though. So I still would do the 15, 16, 17, 18. However, in the areas in quad 1 that still had like the 4mm pockets, I would use the 13, 14, or the 11, 12, and 13, 14. I have the 13, 14 here. So once again, to get it adapted, I know I have the correct working end here. Again, just even like the 15, 16, this isn't as awkward for me to try and do the insertion for, just because I think sometimes that the longer, sorry, I guess this isn't helping me right now, the longer instrument sort of is awkward for me to try and open. But this again would be the shorter strokes, starting before the distal, being closed and then open, and just following that into the distal portion of the posterior teeth. So that was the 13, 14. Again, coming around to the posterior. Make sure I am adapted here correctly. Again, 13. Same kind of strokes, oblique strokes, the horizontal stroke at the bottom of the pocket. And then what do I have here? Oh, this is my anterior curette. So my patient had a lot of sub and supra calculus in sextant 5. So not to get ahead of myself, obviously with the ultrasonic you would try to get most of that out. And however, with the anterior curette in sextant 5, again, you would do surfaces. I would do surfaces away first, and I would do the entire sextant. But again, with inserting closed and coming up on your fulcrum, to do short strokes. These are more vertical because there's not much angulation with this, but really getting underneath the calculus and pulling up. So again, going in closed and getting underneath the calculus and short strokes pulling up. Same thing. And then switch clock positions. Can you still see it? Closed again, starting right before the mesial, and again pulling up. Short strokes. Sorry, I keep getting stuck here on my Typodont. So the anterior curette, I don't really ever have much issue with that because it is such a straight instrument. It almost helps you to keep it straight. I also have the oh, I picked up the wrong one. I don't want that one. I also had the Nevi, which I know you said not to really bother showing you, but that would be for the supracalc, especially in sextant 5, or if there were any in sextant 2 at all. And also I like to use the scoop side sort of when the teeth are really small in here, and sometimes this is a little bit too long for me and I get worried about really like tearing into the tissue. So I typically will go down and get underneath and pull upward and pop the calculus off if it's left there. I would do a lot of assessment strokes in this particular area though, just because of the fact that with the SRP, I just wanted to make sure that there's nice smooth surfaces, and you don't go more than like a millimeter underneath the gingival margin on this, and all the way up into the contact. Now I know before you told us we could kind of roll back and make sure we get that tip in there to pop out any calculus. I would imagine that this particular patient would have that. Also, there is unusual tooth morphology in sextant 5, so this would be another good instrument because of how long and thin it is to kind of get in those overlapping areas. So you insert obviously just before the mesial in either direction you're going, and do those working strokes, and they are a little bit longer just because you're supra, but following all the way up, especially getting into those areas where the teeth may overlap, because that obviously seems to be a problem area for this particular patient, having so much calc buildup. Um, Let me think. I think that is pretty much the universal sickle is also another one that I would use, but that's something that I'm really comfortable with from utilizing. Obviously, it's the same thing as the Explorer, pretty much with the uh, way in which you hold it, with the adaptation and everything. Uh, I do struggle quite a lot in, I showed you quadrant one as well, which this is hard to do because I can't be in the actual clock position, but I always struggle on the lingual and the posterior. So just to kind of show you what I am talking about right now, um, just make sure I have this. Okay. Uh, it's really hard for me to always angle back this way, and this isn't a very good way to show you, but a lot of times it's hard with all the tissue in the front here for me to get a good enough fulcrum, and I end up like this almost. But I don't feel I get good pressure on the instrument this way, and it also sort of ruins my angulation. So if you have any suggestion on fulcruming in quad one for the linguals, that would be wonderful, because I'm super awkward, and also trying to get back there with the instrument uh, is harder for me, and without slipping and everything. So I turn the instrument and coming up into the contact, sort of rolling back a little bit to make sure I don't miss anything right underneath that contact area. And I'm leading with the tip of the instrument. Turning, I first go distally and then turn and go mesially in the posterior. And then usually the anteriors, I'll use an anterior sickle. I won't typically use the universal, but I can though, especially if it's not really anything that's too tenacious. You just use the same guideline as you would for an anterior sickle. So that pretty much is the instrumentation for quad one, and for my patient in particular, like I said, just taking into account the deeper pocketing, the furcation on number 3, and the patient did have a lot of sensitivity in sextant 5 and 6 for the ultrasonic. So the other thing I would suggest is doing some type of local anesthetic or topical at the very least, and going back through and just assessing those areas, and making sure that all of the root surfaces are pretty smooth, so that it allows for the attachment in those 5 millimeter pockets.